Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be discussing genomic de-identification and Future Privacy Forum's work in that arena. I'm Katelyn Ringrose. I'm our Christopher Wolfe Diversity Law Fellow, and I'm joined today by our Health Policy Lead.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Katelyn. My name is Dr. Rachele Hendricks-Sturrup, and as Katelyn mentioned, I am the new Health Policy Counsel at the FPF, and am very excited to be with you all today.
Great. Thank you for being on this call with me, Rachel. I thought it'd be very helpful for our members and anyone who's viewing this to get some of their questions answered about genomic de-identification. I think the first question, just to kind of set the field here, is whether genetic information itself is personally identifying information, and if it's PII at all.
That's a great question. Actually, genomic data was not considered personally identifiable information under the HIPAA's initial safe harbor provisions, but after 2009, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act introduced regulations that sought to modify the HIPAA privacy rule to instead clarify that genetic information is considered health information that should be protected, and that is personally.
Great. And so we've heard a little bit, and you and I have talked a little bit about these 18 unique identifiers under HIPAA. And so it's my understanding that when genomic information is accompanied by these identifiers, it is PII. Is genetic information always PII, or just when it's accompanied by another identifier?
Well, in a traditional sense, genomic data can be de-identified when it's stripped of traditional identifiers like name and address. And also in general, there are various levels to de-identification, and these levels can be generally applied to genomic data or otherwise. The FPF actually has provided a detailed infographic to the public describing these various levels. And also in cases where genomic data is used for research, institutional review boards could treat research activities that involve only the analysis of de-identified genomic data as non-human subjects research per the common rule. In those cases, genomic data being de-identified or stripped of personal identifiers would essentially render the data sets as non-human subjects research because it has been stripped of personal identifiable information.
Why is this process of stripping genomic information of any identifier so important for the exchange of genetic data?
Well, in a general sense, de-identification strategies are the first line of defense for ensuring that genomic data is not readily identifiable. And this is especially important when privacy is a concern among an individual or many individuals that contribute their data to a data set. So again, de-identification can be used as a first-line strategy to protect the privacy of individuals, but also it's an important strategy to protect the privacy of those individuals' biological relatives when we're concerning genomic information. Simply because when one individual shares their genomic information or contributes it to a data set, it immediately implicates the biological relatives of that individual who share genetic biomarkers or genetic markers in general with that contributing individual.
I think that's a great thing to note. People come up to me all the time and they say, I would never share my genetic information. And I think it's important to say, well, maybe a relative of yours has, and maybe your genetic information isn't as private as you think it is. Have you had any instances that are similar?
Yes, absolutely. Well, considering that direct-to-consumer genetic testing is popular at the moment, I myself and some relatives of mine have felt compelled to engage in such testing to find distant relatives and also confirm known relatives, if you want to look at it that way as well for fun. So I have had some relatives engage in genetic testing and in genealogical databases, and I have brought the question to them, saying, "Hey, have you thought about what that means for not just yourself, but also everyone you're related to? What are your concerns about privacy?" Some had concerns, some didn't. Some who even had concerns felt that it was no big deal and that it could easily blow over or really have no implications for them long term or their family members. So within that, there's even variations in the number and also in the type of concerns that either I can have or my relatives can have, and I'm sure that same dynamic exists for lots of families.
This isn't just diversionary, though, right? There are aspects where it's important to have information that is personally identifiable when it comes to research sets. Is that true?
That is true. Um, I think that oftentimes when we think about genomic de-identification, we think of just stripping these traditional identifiers like name and address. But there are very important uh, there are a lot of important information, or at least types of information that should be considered when we're investigating what genetic information means. Oftentimes, this is described as phenotypic data. Genomic data alone is useful only when it can be compared to lots of other genetic profiles of individuals within a data set, and also when it can be correlated against phenotypic information that's reported by individuals within that data set or a single individual who has contributed their information to the data set. And it's important because it would allow researchers to determine, again, what that genetic information means and how that specific genomic biomarker, how it might exist across a particular population that exhibits a certain phenotype, like a disease, for example.
That's great. Thank you. I want to touch on genomic de-identification and why it's come under such intense pressure recently from some critics. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I think a lot of it stems from the fact that genetic testing is popularized by, and also a lot more available due to direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies introducing products, genetic testing products on the market daily. What naturally follows this are unprecedented levels of data aggregation and genomic data sharing across various secure and unsecure platforms. Um, One example are genealogical databases that are publicly available that allow anyone to upload their DNA files to find relatives and make those kinds of connections. And so, for that reason, among others, that involve more technical security aspects, many argue that traditional de identification is, in fact, not enough to protect against the re identification of genomic data simply because the data is being shared in various ways by a single individual. And again, it implicates their relatives as a result. And also because, again, data is aggregated across platforms that can allow researchers or anyone really to link a specific individual to other identifiers from other data sets. And so, again, that goes back to combining genetic information with phenotypic data that might exist in a separate database, figuring out how to link those two data sets or that data together is what makes genomic data entirely re-identifiable, or at least the possibility of re-identification entirely possible.
It's great. In your perspective, do you think that genomic data is ever fully de-identified or can ever fully be de-identified without encryption?
That's an area of debate, not just in my mind, but to a lot of folks who are engaging in genomic testing. Some believe that it's impossible to de-identify or at least keep genetic information de-identified for a prolonged amount of time. And there are some who believe that it is entirely possible with the right computational methods. But I personally would argue that more sophisticated security measures are perhaps needed to ensure that genetic information cannot be re-identified or used in unauthorized ways.
It's great. What makes the genomic data encryption process so untenable right now?
Well, encryption, although it's a strong strategy just to ensure that genomic data is secure and not readily de-identifiable, encryption alone comes with its costs. It comes with costs associated with time and effort, computing power, and so forth. So for that reason, we should consider encryption a strong strategy, but we should also think about when encryption should be leveraged or could be leveraged without compromising the utility of genomic information. The utility meaning that the genetic information could be used to make important or draw important conclusions about a data set with important implications like clinical care.
Great. Could you point to any technologies that leverage novel encryption methodologies, or any technologies that really showcase secure sharing of genomic information?
Sure. Well, I can think of two actually. Off the top of my head, there's encrypted email use and VPN use, and then there's also homomorphic encryption. Encrypted email use involves using an encrypted email address or a VPN that can mask both consumer behavior and the consumer's identity to protect the privacy of that consumer. And that would occur at the data generation and collection phase. So this encrypted email use and VPN use tactic is useful because it starts at the initiation point. So from there, the consumer and their DNA are both anonymous at the very start. Homomorphic encryption is more for cloud-based data, and it's a method that uses math to make cloud computing more secure. Math meaning that mathematical calculations are applied to the encrypted data first without decrypting the data, and it's shared in that modified way with end users of the encrypted genomic data. So the end users of the data can use it in ways that that are meaningful and return it back to the initial sender of the genomic data without the actual integrity of the data being compromised.
That's great. It sounds like two very viable solutions, one for a consumer and one for a data processor. Besides encryption, can you think of any other methodologies that we can use to protect the privacy of genomic information?
Yeah, actually, there are two more that have become quite popular and have sparked a lot of research or ideas for research, ideas for entrepreneurship, and so forth. There are blockchain-based ledgers that can be used to distribute genomic data in a verifiable, permanent, and traceable format, which can assure many folks who are looking to share genomic data in a very private manner. Blockchain specifically uses smart contracts, and those contracts are embedded in digital code. And blockchain in itself can store data in a transparent way and within shared databases that are protected from tampering, revision, deletion, any kind of tinkering in that regard. Differential privacy as well is a new and emerging technique for privacy. It's a method that involves introducing noise into a data set. And with differential privacy, a person wouldn't be able to, or an entity wouldn't be able to determine whether or not a specific individual's data was included in the data set because of that noise being introduced into the data set. So although noise is being introduced, the actual quality and value of the data set is not compromised because when an algorithm is applied to that data set, the output for the algorithm is largely unchanged or unaffected by the noise that was introduced. So for that reason, differential privacy is an attractive method for researchers that are relying on data sets to draw important conclusions.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining me on this call. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's watching. If you have any questions for Rachel and I on this topic, or really anything related to health, genetics, and privacy, just go ahead and send us a message on LinkedIn, send us an email, really any way, get in contact with us. We'd love to hear from you. We have a paper coming out here from FPF on genomic de-identification in particular, and we continue to work on topics like these. So thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to talking with you more.